I'm not necessarily worried about singularity and kind of our brains being taken over by machines and things like that. I know, to me, generally, I'm an optimist, and I think that there's a lot of good things that can be done through AI, ways to make life more efficient, ways to make things more cost-effective, ways to expand the economy into more places. So I'm bullish on it, but I am concerned at the very least around what that means for our economy. And people who are agile and nimble and really smart will sort of figure out how to succeed no matter what happens. Probably people watching this, or by definition, if you're interested in this, you're probably going to figure it out. There's a lot of people who are going to struggle, and I think we've got to be really careful about that so that it don't ignite, a global depression. I think blockchain is we're just getting started. So out of my personal foundation, Tusk Montgomery Philanthropies, we are trying to create mobile voting so that people can vote in elections. The very first mobile vote was cast in the U.S. over blockchain about 6 weeks ago in West Virginia for the West Virginia primary. So it's very small pilot, but I think we're getting some proof of concept. And my dream is that everyone one day will be able to just vote in any election they want by just pressing a button. And instead of having 10 or 12% of people show up and turn out in a primary, we're at 70 or 80%, which means that instead of reflecting the views of the extremes on both sides, our Congress, our state legislature, everything else has to represent the views of the mainstream. So to me, that's the solution to democracy. So that's the one that I'm personally working on and most excited about. I think crypto generally will bring a lot of smaller economies into the global economy. The U.S. doesn't need that, but there's lots and lots of small countries all over the world that I think would really benefit from that. In Uber's case, you had kind of a unique set of circumstances where you had a product in taxi that just hadn't improved or evolved in decades. So really it had no fans, no supporters, nothing. A product in Uber that generally works pretty well. It's a more predictable, cleaner, safer, often more economic ride. And that juxtaposition was so severe that we were able to go into a city, hold off the regulators, build a customer base, and get enough people engaged that when they then tried to pass laws that would put us out of business, we would get 100,000 of our customers to email their city council member, their state legislator, whatever it was. And then all of a sudden, these politicians who normally do their bidding from their donors, which are the taxi industry, said, oh no, I'm going to lose my election if I don't figure out how to make this thing work. And that strategy's worked really well. It's actually, we call it Travis's Law, because Travis and I invented it, 7 or 8 years ago. In any society that has rule of law, where people are democratically elected, that can work. The challenge that I have now that we invest in work with dozens of startups, is where can you create that kind of movement and where can't you? There are apps that people are really passionate about, like fantasy sports. Even though it's a small area, the people who play fantasy sports really love fantasy sports. They will mobilize. That's really useful. But there are other areas that are, important in education, healthcare, whatever, that I think the app does well, the business can do well. But are people passionate enough they're going to advocate for it politically? No. And in that case, the strategy that we run has to be different, right? Whenever we can rely on our customers, that's always the most effective way. There were just some fundamental structural issues at the company that I think they really couldn't have gone public in 2017. And maybe they could at some point in 2018. But those are all being addressed. Like, they just hired a CFO. So they've got a management team in place. Dara, I think, is doing a good job of kind of getting a handle on everything. I think they were in some parts of the world that didn't make sense for them to be the primary business in, so Southeast Asia, Russia, China. So I think in selling and partnering with some of the local companies, that ultimately kind of gets their P&L into a better place. And then third, it looks like Didi is going to go public before Uber. Uber owns 17% of Didi. So it'll somewhat be an interesting kind of precursor for the Uber IPO, because the Didi IPO soars. A, that means there's a lot of investor demand for ride-sharing startups. And B, if it's a $100 billion IPO, whenever you do the valuation for Uber, you got to factor in $17 billion right there for their stake in Didi, right? So, there's a lot of moving pieces still. And look, I still have about half of my shares left, and so I'm eager for an IPO so I can monetize it. But hopefully within the next 12 months we'll see it happen. In my world, and again, I sit for better and worse at this very niche intersection of technology and politics, and because we're the only ones that do it, I'm obviously really focused on it. But it's when you're trying to disrupt something in a big way, by definition, if you succeed, you're going to get a lot of pushback. No one thanks you for disrupting them. They punch you in the nose. And if you don't anticipate that and plan for that, and you don't handle the government and politics right, you can get put out of business really, really quickly. And I think that a lot of startups are so focused on other metrics, on their engineers, on their growth, on their fundraising, on their customer acquisition, things that matter, but they can't matter to the exclusion of other things that also matter. But the startups who are not proactive enough to see that and act on it, to me, are the ones that are going to face the most trouble and have the lowest chances of succeeding. I actually have a book coming out in September specifically about this, because at any given moment we can work with, invest in, say, a dozen startups, and there's 17,000 in the U.S. So the idea is to give people a better way to think about, okay, here's how politics works, here's how the regulators are thinking about it, here's how the politicians are thinking about it, here's how you're thinking about it, here's how you put it all together, and it tells it through the stories of Uber, Tesla, Lemonade, FanDuel, Handy, all the different campaigns that we've run over the last couple of years. So I'll make a shameless plug. You can pre-order it in Barnes & Nobles or Amazon today. It's called The Fixer, Saving Startups from Death by Politics. It's a memoir being published by Penguin. First third of the book is my history in politics, so it's Bloomberg's campaign manager, deputy governor of Illinois, Schumer's communications director, and kind of learning in the trenches. The next third of the book is Uber and kind of creating the strategy around how do you make ride-sharing legal in every market in the U.S. And the final third is creating Tusk Ventures and being the first fund ever really focused on investing in startups in regulated industries, and then fighting out these battles for all these different companies in our portfolio against different entrenched interests so that they can operate and succeed. And so hopefully it gives people, A, I think it's a fun, funny book, so people will just enjoy reading it, but B, gives you a roadmap if you are a startup for how you should think about disruption, how you should think about regulation, how you should think about politics.